If I were to ask you who the most powerful person in American politics was, who would be your guess? Would it be President Joe Biden? Would it be Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer? Or maybe would it be House Majority Leader Nancy Pelosi? Well, the answer is that it's probably none of them. The answer is that it's probably Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Well, who is Senator Joe Manchin? Senator Joe Manchin is a senior Democratic U.S. Senator from West Virginia, and he's held his seat since 2010, which means he's won both of his two election campaigns within the state. But why is Senator Joe Manchin one of the most powerful politicians in Washington? Well, with a Senate that's flipped 50-50, Democrats need Manchin's vote in order to maintain a majority. If you look at the map here, you can see how there's 50 Democratic senators and 50 Republican senators. In an event where all 50 Democratic senators vote for a piece of legislation and all 50 Republican senators vote for a piece of legislation, there's a tie in the Senate. And the person who breaks that tie is the vice president. Currently, the vice president is Kamala Harris, and she would likely side with the Democratic Party in the event of a tie, which means that the Democrats do have a Senate majority if all 50 of their senators turn out and vote for them. But if even one senator turns out and doesn't vote for them, it means that it's incredibly difficult for them to get that majority because they would need a Republican senator to vote with them. And while that obviously has happened before, it's unlikely within this case. And there are a few traditional Republicans that could vote for a Democratic Party piece of legislation. But even if that happens, it's likely that the Democrats can't count on that vote because that vote could go either side, because it is still a risk for a Republican senator to vote within the other party. And just to note that the states that are striped in green, so the states of Vermont and Maine, still have independent senators, but those senators still caucus with the Democratic Party. For the state of Vermont, the independent senator is Senator Bernie Sanders, and for the state of Maine, the independent senator is Angus King. Both of those senators still caucus and mostly vote for the Democratic Party, especially Senator Bernie Sanders. Angus King, not as much. Just because Joe Manchin is one of the 50 Democratic senators, that doesn't mean that he's now the most powerful person in American politics. So what specifically makes him the most powerful person in American politics? Well, it's because he's a moderate Democrat. And when we look at his voting record in a couple of minutes, you'll actually see why that's quite surprising in the way that he voted under the Trump presidency. But there are other senators that are moderate, but none of them are in the same position as Manchin. Now, if we take a look at the actual voting records here, you can see the percentages that each Democratic senator and each Republican senator voted in the age of Trump. So this is basically how often a member votes in line with a Trump position. Obviously, Democratic senators tend to vote less with Trump, and Republican senators tend to vote more with Trump. And you can see the most Democratic senators here, such as John Hickenlooper, Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, they obviously, Kamala Harris, they only vote within Trump's policies very little, 16%, 15%, 0% for Senator John Hickenlooper. You can see why a couple of these Democratic senators don't vote with Trump. But if we move down this list a little bit more, we can see that this list eventually evens out. And a couple Democratic senators actually voted more for President Trump's policies than they did for the policies of their own party. So the senators that voted more for Trump's policies were Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Senator Joe Donnelly of Indiana, Senator Heidi Heitkamp from North Dakota. Of those four senators, two actually didn't win their re-election campaign. So Senator Joe Donnelly didn't win re-election in the state of Indiana, and Senator Heidi Heitkamp also lost her election in the state of North Dakota, which leaves Senator Kyrsten Sinema and Senator Joe Manchin. Well, Senator Kyrsten Sinema comes from the state of Arizona. Arizona is also traditionally a Republican state, and it only went for the Democratic Party in the most recent 2020 election. If we look at the actual Senate map here, you can see that Arizona, Georgia, West Virginia, the state of the Senator Joe Manchin, and Montana are all traditional Republican states that have Democratic senators. Arizona has Kyrsten Sinema. The reason Kyrsten Sinema won her election is because she needs to be a moderate senator, or else the Republican base that is still present in the state of Arizona functionally won't vote for her if she decides to run for re-election in her next election campaign. What's more surprising is Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia. If we look at the actual margins that Trump won by in the 2020 election in the state of West Virginia, in 2016, Trump won by 42 points. He won by plus 42 points. And in 2020, as you can see here, he won by plus 39 points. That is indicative of overwhelming support for President Trump, considering that the state is West Virginia. But Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat, won in his 2018 senatorial election by plus 3%, which is actually not a bad margin, especially for a Democratic senator. So that is quite odd, especially considering the fact that if we go back to 538 here, you can see that Joe Manchin, his outlier is that Trump won the state by 42.2%, and he was able to sort of flip almost 45% of voters. That's almost half the state to vote for him. So why is this? Well, he's got individual regional popularity within the state of West Virginia. People in the state of West Virginia, they like Senator Joe Manchin because he's able to make it work. He's able to make moderate Democratic policies but still win over a lot of that West Virginian base. And a specific statistic about Senator Joe Manchin is that no Democrat in Congress, so that means in the House of Representatives or the Senate, represents a state as red as the state of West Virginia. No member of Congress has supported such a base that votes for the other party. But first, as we take a look back here at Senator Joe Manchin's voting record, it's important to note that he actually voted in the era of Trump more for Trump. Him and Kyrsten Sinema voted more for Trump's policies than they did for their own parties, 50.4% and 50.4% for both senators. But when we take a look at Senator Joe Manchin's voting record, it's easy to see why Senator Joe Manchin actually causes so many problems for the Democratic Party. But it's important to note that the reason that Joe Manchin won his elections is not because of some electoral miracle. It's because that he's got individual popularity among the West Virginian base. Those people love him, and he's able to make it work. And Joe Manchin is probably the only Democratic senator that can make being a Democratic senator work in the state of West Virginia. While his policies and political ideologies might not be as ideal as it for the Democratic Party, it's important to note that he's probably the only Democratic senator that could win in the state of West Virginia. And when we actually take a look at the 2018 primaries when Joe Manchin was running for re-election, no other Democrat within the state of West Virginia got even close to winning the state. No other Democrat cracked even 10% to any other Republican senator. So it's important to note that the fact that Joe Manchin can win in West Virginia is not some electoral fluke. It's because he's got individual popularity that it's likely that no other Democrat can achieve within that Republican base. So where does Joe Manchin actually fall ideologically? So some of the Republican/Trump era policies that he supported was that he opposed raising the minimum wage. He currently, even in recent political history, he's opposed removing the filibuster, and he supported Trump's immigration policies. He actually sided with Trump a lot considering his immigration policies. And he also confirmed most of Trump's cabinet positions and judicial positions. So it's important to note that Senator Joe Manchin actually voted with Trump on a lot of key policies. He actually agreed with Trump on a lot of key policies, but he also differed in Trump in a lot of ways. Senator Manchin supported Medicare for all. He supported a plethora of other things. If we look at the Wikipedia page here, he supported increasing the number of justices on the Supreme Court, and he also supported attempts to defund the police. And so it's important to note that Manchin goes both ways, and Manchin doesn't decide based off of party lines on where he stands on certain policies. He purely votes off of his own political ideology and his own political intentions. But lastly, it's also important to note that Joe Manchin's so-called power is not going to last long. If we look at the 2020 Senate election map here, these are all contested states, and it's likely, and I'll be doing a Senate prediction video soon, it's likely that it shifts. It's still hard to tell whether it will go for either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, but whichever party it goes for, it's likely that it won't be a 50-50 tie for either the parties, which means that Joe Manchin's power no longer becomes as relevant. It no longer becomes as powerful because Joe Manchin isn't the swing vote anymore. Biden can't do a lot of the policies that he wanted to do. He can't raise the minimum wage unless the Democrats negotiate with Senator Joe Manchin, and Senator Joe Manchin stated that he opposes raising the minimum wage, and so a lot of the policies that Joe Biden wanted to do just can't be done, and that a lot of the policies that the Democratic Party wanted to pass for their own popularity, but for their own political ideology, they just can't do because Senator Joe Manchin and other moderate senators. It's important to note that he's not the only one, but there's a lot of moderate Democratic senators that come from traditionally Republican states, and if the Democratic Party wants to win, wants to have a Senate majority, they need to make trade-offs, and they need to be able to run senators that aren't as Democratic in their ideology, but that can still win elections in conservative states. But that was everything for this video. I hope everyone enjoyed. I hope this was informational. Thank you, and goodbye.